today just about this very issue. Here's what we know. What do you think about this? What questions do you have? What challenges do you have? So I want to just highlight some of these because I think they might be stirring up in your mind as well. This is one of the most popular ones. Isn't this just an issue of poverty? You're carving out a whole morning to talk just about the issue of housing, but isn't this really a greater issue of poverty? My response to that would be yes, poverty is a major contributor to this housing issue, to the housing problem, and the housing issue is a major contributor to the poverty problem. They go hand in hand. You cannot address one without addressing the other. Both issues are part of a larger system. It's the first time I've used the word system today, but I will use it more. They go hand in hand. What one sector does in this community affects another sector. What one collaborative does affects another collaborative, and on and so forth. And so to highlight the system issue, I want to give you an example here as it relates to poverty. How many of you would, and I know it's kind of a silly example, but how many of you would knowingly trade $5 for $1? Rick, if I gave you $1 and I asked for $5 and we parted ways, what if it was I gave you $100 and you gave me $500? It doesn't seem too logical, right? Not a very good investment. I don't think anyone would invest in that. But that is exactly what is happening in our community every single day. For some of you, this might be a familiar graph. For others, this is extremely shocking. I've only come to be aware of this over the last several weeks myself. This is what's called the cliff effect. And what this is highlighting is this is a real example for one parent with 2 children. And what it shows is on the x-axis, as this parent earns more money, as her hourly wage goes up, on the y-axis is total benefits for the month, total resources. So that means it's not just income, it's also federal subsidies for child care and things like food stamps. So total benefit. As she earns more, when she hits $9.40 an hour, if she gets a 10-cent raise, her benefits drop right away. Immediately. Not graduated, not scaled, immediately loses those benefits. So back to the scenario, how many of you would trade $500 for $100? That's the decision that people have to realistically make every day. Do I really want to raise? Because my real income is going to go away. $790 immediately goes away. So again, I use the example 5 to 1 because I like to imagine a $1 raise would be $160 extra a month in income, but you would lose $790 a month. And then at $12.22 an hour, you lose your food stamps. This is a very real issue. This is a systematic issue. And we need to pay attention to things like this because it isn't as simple as you just need to raise wages. Well, you're going to put a lot of people in a really bad situation. We need to address this as a community because what one sector does affects another. Another comment and objection. An objection might not be the wrong word, or might be the wrong word here, just really thoughts. We just need to focus on getting people jobs. If we get people jobs, everything will take care of itself. And I'd say, yes, the jobs are extremely important. And if they're low wage, we need the housing that supports them. Supports those individuals working those jobs. The jobs paying low wages aren't meant for individuals supporting their family. I think this comes from the mindset that, I think 20 years ago, everyone who was in an entry-level job maybe was in college or was a high school graduate, had a GED, but the reality is these jobs are being filled by people trying to support their families. It's not just young kids that are entering into these positions. I'm going to really toe the line here on the challenging perceptions, so I'm just going to warn you. We don't want people to rely on housing subsidies. This is common. I've heard this, I've sat across from a lot of people who do not like the concept of subsidized housing. And my response to that would be yes. Ideally, most people won't need permanent supportive housing forever. Hopefully we meet that gap and that bridge and people can go on to financial independence, hopefully. And I think we need to challenge our perception on this a little bit. What is a subsidy? Definition, a form of financial or in-kind support extended to the economic sector, institution, business, or individual, generally with the aim of promoting economic and social policy. Pretty clear-cut definition of what a subsidy is. So I've put on the board subsidy A, subsidy B. Subsidy A, $44 billion a year. Subsidy B, $70 billion a year on the low side. Subsidy A is HUD's 2013 budget. HUD stands for the Housing and Urban Development Department. This is the federal arm of the government that focuses on providing housing subsidies in our community. Okay, not all of that $44 billion is subsidies. There's overhead expense and things like that, but it just gives you a figure to work with here, $44 billion. Subsidy B, I receive a few $1,000s of every single year and have been for the last several years. That's the 2012 mortgage interest deduction in this country that many middle and upper class individuals have the benefit of taking advantage of. And it was created to promote economic and social policy. It was created to drive home ownership. I'm not saying home ownership is a bad thing, but if we look at what a subsidy is, it helps you buy a house. I know it's helped me and my family. So again, I use this not to be crass, but to highlight an example of just how, as we look at this issue, we have to start thinking different or nothing is going to change. Other comments. You've talked a lot about rentals, but don't we want to encourage home ownership? Okay, I just mentioned home ownership. I'd say yes, absolutely. I think home ownership is still very much a part of the American dream. I think it's a part of our preferred future. And it's simply out of reach for many. I showed the example of the bridge. I think that highlights the metaphor quite well. But there's other things going on, right? The first one's insufficient income. It costs more money to buy a house. If you have a lack of savings, you can't make a down payment on a house, right? So it's harder to build up that cushion. If you have overwhelming debt or a low credit score, it can be very difficult to obtain a house, become a homeowner. And then this last one's probably the most important, I think. Ongoing cost of home ownership can be high. We have tons of affordable housing. You can get a house for $35,000 in the community. You can buy it, you can't live in it. Utilities are going to be through the roof. There's a lot of fixing up that has to do, a lot of damage. The ongoing costs are too high. So the barriers just they're there. Home ownership is not a reality for a lot of people in our community. So I've touched on the problem, really what's our current reality, what's the issue that we're facing. And so now I'm going to transition into what does this mean for us? What impact does this have on our future? And again, some of this will be a little repetitive, but I think it's good to share again. So again, more money spent on housing, you become burdened by your housing, means less money for other basic needs. You're not paying for transportation, clothing, food. Other impacts on the individual and family. Countless studies show that transient families have higher health issues, right? You develop higher levels of stress, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. The children suffer. Okay? Studies show that with transient families that are moving in and out of homes a lot, mental health, developmental delays, and depression are high, and high residential mobility, again, moving a lot, means reduced academic performance. We've put a lot of time and energy in this community on early childhood education, rightfully so. We are shaping the future of this community through that initiative and initiatives. And housing plays a major role in this. What is the environment in which these kids are learning? Slim to no margin. So when you have families that are paying so great for housing, one thing goes wrong, right? Your car breaks down, your child has a medical bill, everything comes unraveled. You lose the house, you're back to square one. Okay, so there's no margin for error when you're paying so great a sacrifice for your house or living situation. What's the impact on workforce, business, and the economy? One, there's a competitive disadvantage in attracting and retaining workers. Again, if we have these jobs and we want to fill them, where are these workers going to come from? If they can't afford to live in the community, how far are they willing to drive to get here? And then if they do take the job, again, going back to the impact on the individuals and families, if you're stressed out, you're anxious, you're depressed, how focused are you on productivity, being on time, showing up for work, advancing in your organization? Housing plays a major role. Employees work in the community but don't spend money there. Okay, this gets to the larger economy issue. We want people to work and live in our community. We want to pay them so they can turn around and spend money in our community. Grand Haven Chamber of Commerce shared a statistic that greater than 50% of their workforce comes from outside Tri-Cities area. Greater than 50%. That's thousands that are earning money there and then spending it on housing, restaurants, clothing, entertainment, elsewhere. We want people to live and spend money here. Housing availability and costs are top quality of life indicators for company site selection. So for those that aren't in the world of economic development, what this means is when a company looks to expand or relocate to an area, they're looking for certain indicators that what does this community have to offer? And affordable housing and supply of housing is a key one. If we're going to bring 100 jobs to this area, we want to know we can fill them. That is a key thing, that is an extremely key thing to consider. I love this quote. When in stable housing, you now have the confidence to go out and better your life. You can put your stuff down and not worry about it. You learn how to handle life better and stay focused. This is a recent participant in the Community Housing Partnership between Good Samaritan Ministries and Community Action House. This was a subsidized housing program. I love this comment because, it highlights, if I'm not worried about my housing, if I'm not worried about being evicted at the end of the week, other things in life can go much better, right? I'm more motivated at work. I'm more motivated to help with my child's education. What is the impact on social services? And this is probably where I can relate the most because this is the world I live in with nonprofit and government. Social services end up serving the same individuals and families repeatedly. And this gets back to my example from the Holland Rescue Mission, is you can get clients to a point, and then you send them off, and they find themselves in a bad situation, and they come full circle, and then we end up serving them again. So what does that mean for the philanthropists in our community? Well, I'm going to make the case that our charitable businesses and individuals end up throwing good money after bad. I'm not saying that the organizations doing the work on the back end are doing bad work. They are doing phenomenal work. But what I'm saying is if we continue to neglect that gap, we could be throwing good money after bad because we're not addressing one of the key foundations to success. Greater impact on the community. I really struggled with this. I first had 20 things on this slide, and then I said I'm just going to go with one. Our community is designed for us, not by us. And what I mean by this is if we don't get out ahead in doing this in a cross-sector collaborative manner, the community is going to be designed for us. You may or may not be familiar with the term gentrification. What that means is when, going back to history, everyone used to live in the cities, then middle and upper class moved out into the suburbs, and low income became the cities. And now what you're seeing is middle and upper income are coming back to the cities, redeveloping those areas, right? And what that does, if not done well, and again, for clarification's sake, some gentrification is good. You want to redevelop areas, absolutely. You want mixed income neighborhoods. But left unchecked, you push all low income back out. Where do low income individuals and families go? Well, history repeats itself. They're going to go into the suburbs. And you're starting to see this. The greatest example, San Francisco is on the news every week about what's going on there with some of their tech companies. Southside Chicago is another example. We're starting to see this in Grand Rapids. How long before City of Holland and City of Grand Haven, it happens there? So this highlights for me why I think we need to work together as municipalities and as a greater region so that we can help design the future we want for our neighborhoods. Talked about the current reality and the problem, talked about the impact and kind of, if gone unchecked, what that means for our future. And I had just gotten done telling my planning team before everybody came that I was going to cut a major component out of today because I didn't think I'd get this in an hour, but I am going to squeeze it in. So if you would bear with me here. Well, let me cover this first. What does the preferred future look like? At this point, we really have no idea. We don't have an idea. Because we need to introduce this conversation into a group like this. Other community stakeholders need to speak into this. But at this point, at this stage, there are a couple things I think we can share of what we would like to see for the future. One, I've already made this statement, that Ottawa County would not only be desirable, but it would be a practical place to live because housing is accessible to all. Future neighborhoods are designed, mixed income. I always find that this is an interesting conundrum when you talk about doing new low-income developments. I often hear, well, you don't want to put them all, you don't want to group low income all together. Well, what that means is, the opposite of that is you have mixed income neighborhoods. And I think that's right. I think that's what we want. Housing available at all income levels, I already shared that. And families have that bridge to success that I talked about. So if you would bear with me for just a minute, I had taken this out, and I'm putting it back in. I do have photo courtesy and references for those that. So, going back to that diagram I showed earlier, and I just screwed up all my slides, so I can't go back to there very easily. To get to the preferred future, we need to look at solutions. Today is not about solutions. After this, we are not going to discuss solutions, because there's a critical piece that's missing. But I do think there is some value in highlighting what other communities have done to address this issue. As I run through these briefly, please do not hear that these are recommended solutions. Please do not hear that. We are not saying we've done the studies, we've done the research, this is what we need to do. Absolutely not. This is what other communities have done, have chosen to do to address the issue of affordable housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, I think it's natural that the first place you jump is increasing the supply of housing, right? And the way that is done today is largely through the utilization of what's called the low-income housing tax credit. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but a for-profit or a nonprofit organization can apply for these credits, and basically a for-profit entity, like usually a bank, will buy those credits at some value on the dollar, and so they will fund the project, and then the for-profit or nonprofit developer puts up low-income housing. Can be mixed income housing as well, depending on what the stipulations are. For various populations, right? Individuals with disabilities, low income, seniors. So we have plenty of examples right here in Ottawa County. I just want to highlight some of these, some of what's already taken place. Heritage Homes, they're here today. A few years ago, did a number of units, and so just to give you some input and output information, about $700,000 in pre-development costs and land purchase, about $7.1 million came in the form of tax credits, and out of that, 34 units were developed for homeless and individuals with disabilities, and 11 units for low-income individuals and families. Okay, just give you an idea, input, output, project that's taken place. But when I use the term low-income housing, affordable housing, again, I want to challenge perceptions here. What image comes to mind? And this is the one time I will ask for participation. Can anyone shout out a name that you think of when you think of low-income housing? Oh, come on, someone be great.
Calibri Greens?
Cabrini Green. Yeah, thank you. This conversation, as the planning team's been out talking to stakeholders, every time low-income housing subsidy comes up, Cabrini Green gets mentioned in the conversation. And I highlight this because this is largely not how housing is being done anymore. This is, 20, 30 years ago, the federal government put up large public projects, that's where we get that term projects, where they just built these mass structures and put a lot of low-income individuals in there. That is not happening so much anymore. And so I want to, again, in challenging some perceptions, I want to show you some examples of how low-income housing is done today. This is, I just read off Heritage Homes. These are lovely facilities. You may recognize them throughout the county of Ottawa, both Holland and Grand Haven. Midtown Villages was completed in recent years, right? Taking an old rundown building, rehabbing it, refurbishing it, putting in low-income seniors. Very nice facilities. Did not have an issue filling those. Here's a for-profit example, Village at the Pines in Grand Haven. Okay? For-profit developer, low-income housing for seniors, extremely high quality. To get out of our region a little bit and to get us kind of thinking creatively about how else we can go about doing housing, Mercy Housing in Sacramento, California, this was an old rundown motel. Used tax credits, refurbished it, turned it into mixed income housing. Okay, you can do low-income housing well. And here's a recent example in Grand Rapids as well, Tapestry Square. Again, far different from Cabrini Green. But I also know from talking to a lot of folks that utilizing government anything, tax credits, anything, creates a stigma. So we want to highlight examples that don't have federal government involved. Down in Kalamazoo, so here's a strategy I would call nonprofit operated rental housing. And this, basically what happened here down in Kalamazoo is you had a private foundation that purchased some apartment units and rehabbed them for about $50,000, total cost $375,000. Turned it over to a local nonprofit called Open Doors Ministry to operate. They were able to, they have 15 units, they only open them up to low-income working families. And the rents range anywhere from $350 to $425 a month. Okay, right back in that figure that I showed earlier is deemed affordable. Okay, so here you see a private and nonprofit partnership addressing this very issue. Housing First is a strategy that is gaining momentum around the country. And I just want to highlight a couple examples here. The strategy here is to take chronically homeless individuals off the street, put them in housing right away, and then provide the supportive services that they need from a nonprofit. So down in Charlotte, North Carolina, you have the Urban Ministry Center. They built an 85-unit facility, $10 million investment from private, corporate, and grants. Again, high-quality facility. But what's neat about Charlotte, North Carolina is they did a study that showed after 1 year of doing this, after filling those 85 units, they were able to record 447 fewer emergency room visits for that area, a drop in arrests of 78%, and they estimate that it saved the city about $1.8 million between unbilled medical expenses, between public safety costs and things like that. So you can see there's greater benefits for the community by addressing this issue. So here you have a nonprofit strategy. This is largely nonprofit driven, but has multiple partners added. Same strategy, little different scenario, Nashville, Tennessee. Again, trying to get chronically homeless off the street. This was driven by the local Municipal Planning Commission in Nashville. And they got private landlords to agree to rent a very small fraction of their total housing supply to what we would deem, the difficult to rent. So they all contractually agreed to do this. After a year, 189 individuals and families were housed. And then a nonprofit came and provided the supporting services that are needed. So, driven by local government, contractually agreed with private landlords, and then nonprofit services coming around. You're going to start seeing a theme here as I run through these. Utilize the county land bank. Don't want to go into too much detail here because it can get complicated, but just know the state of Michigan utilizes land banks greater than any other state in the country. And I think just about every county has one. How a county land bank works is when houses are going to tax foreclosure and they become tax reverted properties. The land bank can come in before an auction takes place to sell back to the private market, acquire that property, redevelop it, and sell it. The opportunity here is to bring in a nonprofit during that development stage, or a for-profit, but with the intention of creating affordable housing. So you bring in a Habitat for Humanity to redevelop that housing and make it something that can be used for affordable housing on the back end. So we see this much more common on the east side of the state, Genesee County, Ingham County, but what's interesting is Michigan State University started doing some economic studies on what the impact is on the community. So they looked at Ingham County, about a $31 million investment over several years of acquiring the property and redeveloping them, and they estimate about $56 million in total economic return. Because they got these properties up to a high quality and put them back in the market, $4.9 million back on the tax rolls, and 426 construction jobs were created. So there's value in this. And again, this is just looking at a different tool to use in addressing this issue. This is county government, but there's obviously private market involved and nonprofits involved. Housing trust fund, again, another popular tool that's around the country. This is really any city, county, or state government receiving some kind of dedicated sources, usually from documentation or licensing fees and things like that, tacking on a surcharge and collecting that in a pool and dispersing that to affordable housing needs in the community. So largely gets dispersed down through nonprofit agencies doing work. The state of Michigan has one, 47 states in the country have one, and so the state is already dispersing these. But down in Kalamazoo County, they have one as well. And since 2006, they've allocated $1.25 million to the local efforts of nonprofits focused on affordable housing. So again, this is kind of county government driven, nonprofit received. Landlord Damage Insurance Fund. And again, these are not recommendations, these are just some ideas to get us thinking as we move into this next stage. What's happening here is it's driven by a private foundation, pools some money, and approaches landlords and says, if you will rent to some more difficult renters that you're worried about damaging your property, we will contractually agree with you that if they indeed do damage your property, you can draw from this foundation fund. So it gives that safety net for some landlords that are hesitant about renting to folks. So, study down in Norfolk, Virginia, they did this. After a year, 52 landlords participated, 63 high-barrier families were housed, and after a year, not one dime was drawn from that fund. And on the kind of subjective side, it created much better relationships between landlords and renters. Employer-assisted housing. Okay, we've talked a lot about the supply side here. Let's focus a little bit on the purchasing power side. The strategy here is any housing, renter ownership, that is sponsored, that is financed by your employer. Okay, so the way that this can look, System Sensor is a great example of this down in Illinois. You come work for me, I contractually agree to give you a $5,000 no interest forgivable loan, but you have to stay here for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and at the end of that time, if you're still here, I will forgive that loan. It allows you to put that money towards a down payment on a home, or again, it could be used for rental assistance as well. But this is what we would call a double bottom line, right? It creates more committed, more loyal workers, and it helps address this issue of housing. So over 7 years, 63 employees at System Sensor purchased homes, and the company estimates they saved $100,000 in turnover costs. So they were estimating that because they had such high turnover previously, between training and HR costs and things like that, that they could estimate they were actually saving money by providing this benefit. There's other ways to help increase the purchasing side of our community. And this one can get complicated, but basically what this highlights, it's a national program to train people to help individuals with disabilities apply for Social Security disability. Okay, it's called the SOAR program. In this county alone, half of our homeless population identify themselves as having some disability. It is extremely difficult, though, to apply for Social Security disability. And so what this program does, it trains people to help those folks apply. And a notable study here locally was out of Cadillac, Michigan. Mercy Hospital helped fund a SOAR specialist, and that SOAR specialist would help people that came in for emergency room visits that didn't have insurance and often homeless. And of the applications they applied for, 65% of 23 applications were approved, and the 15 individuals totaled approximately $219,000 in hospital reimbursements. So again, there's not only a value for the individual receiving this, there's greater value for the healthcare system in our community. I know I'm blowing through these really quick, but again, we don't even want to talk solutions today, we just want to start thinking about what are other communities doing to address this. This is the last one I'll highlight, inclusionary zoning. So this strategy is really creating policy that requires new housing development be built, and a certain percentage of new housing be deemed affordable. Now you have some work to do to deem what affordability, how do you define that? But it typically ranges anywhere from 10 to 20%. So an example of this, Vancouver, British Columbia, in 1988, the city, the local planning, the local government there put this into practice, and since then, over 2,600 affordable units have been developed. So any new development had to have 20% of that development be deemed affordable. Okay, so this is a local government-driven solution. But again, it gets us thinking about what options are out there. Now I forgot I have to go back, so please excuse me.